The descent into the abyss. What Jesus really did during the 40 days in the wilderness. The sun had not yet risen when Jesus left the camp on the banks of the Jordan. No one saw him depart. There was no farewell, no explanation. Only the sound of his footsteps sinking into the sand, growing ever more distant from John's voice, from the crowds, from the water still dripping from his hair. He walked without looking back, not because he knew where he was going, but because something inside him demanded distance. It was not escape, it was necessity. The desert did not welcome him. It simply was there, indifferent, vast, making no promises. The landscape repeated itself in shades of ochre and grey, sharp stones, dry shrubs that endured without ever blooming, a sky so clear it felt cruel. Jesus walked slowly, without haste, yet also without pause. He carried nothing, no water, no food, no extra cloak. He carried only his body, and whatever the Jordan had awakened within him. In the first days, hunger was not yet a problem. It was merely an annoyance, a minor distraction. Jesus found a shallow cave among the rocks and settled there. It was not shelter, it was a point of reference, a place to return to when the day's walking ended. He spent the mornings in absolute silence, sitting at the entrance, watching the sun rise with hypnotic slowness. He observed how the light changed the color of the stones, how the shadows moved without sound, how the desert existed without needing witnesses. During those first days, Jesus did not pray, not in the way he always had. He recited no psalms, spoke no blessings, asked for nothing. He simply was present, as though for the first time in his life he did not need to fill the silence with learned words. And in that silence, something began to stir. They were not voices, not visions. It was a deep restlessness, as though layers of himself were beginning to peel away. In the first week, thirst became more urgent than hunger. Jesus found a thin trickle of water among the rocks. It was not pure. It tasted of mineral and earth, but it was enough. He drank slowly in small sips, making it last. The water kept him alive, but not comfortable. Each day the body demanded more. Each day he offered less. Not out of martyrdom, but out of experiment. He wanted to know what happened when the body stopped giving orders. It was in the second week that hunger began to speak. It was not pain, it was presence, a constant sensation in the stomach, in the head, in the muscles. Jesus felt his body slowing down. Every movement required greater effort. Walking became forced meditation. Sitting down was almost complete relief. He observed this transformation with clinical curiosity. He was learning something about limits, about what happens when the essential is removed. Thoughts began to change. They were no longer linear. They came in fragments, disconnected images, memories of Nazareth, of Mary's face, of Joseph's hands working wood, recollections of Egypt, of being a foreigner, of not belonging, voices of rabbis, of children laughing, of men arguing in the synagogue. Everything mixed together without order, as though the mind were reorganizing its internal archive. And then in the third week, something different happened. Jesus was sitting in the cave when he realized he was not alone. There was no one there, no physical presence, yet something occupied the space. It was not God. It was not an angel. It was something closer, more intimate. It was himself, but distorted. A version of himself that spoke with his own voice, yet said things he would never allow aloud. You are starving and could turn these stones into bread. Why not do it? If you really are who John said you are, this would be simple. One word, one gesture, and it's over. No one needs to know. It's just you, the stones, and the hunger. Jesus did not answer, not because he could not, but because he recognized the trap. The temptation was not in performing a miracle. It was in the reasoning, doing it to prove something, doing it to relieve discomfort, doing it because he could, not because he should. He closed his eyes and let the voice fade, but it did not disappear completely. It remained there, waiting. The following days were the hardest. The body began to consume itself. Jesus felt his muscles shrinking, his skin growing thinner, his bones more prominent. Standing up required planning. Walking was an act of pure will. Thirst returned with force, but now the water no longer satisfied in the same way. It was like pouring liquid into a leaking vessel. And the voice returned, stronger, more insistent. You could end this right now. You could come down from here, enter any city, and everyone would follow you. You saw how they looked at John. Imagine what they would do for you if you showed real power. Climb to the pinnacle of the temple and throw yourself down. If God is truly with you, he will not let you be harmed. A demonstration, irrefutable proof. And all the suffering, all this hunger, everything will have been worth it. Jesus opened his eyes. The sunlight was brutal. He looked at his own hands, thin, trembling. He looked at the empty desert. He looked at the sky where nothing happened, and he understood. He understood that the temptation was not to perform the spectacle. It was to use God as a tool, to turn faith into theater, to replace trust with a test. He spoke, for the first time in weeks, with a hoarse and brittle voice. You do not put what is sacred to the test. The voice retreated, but it did not give up. In the 4th week, Jesus could barely move. He spent most of the time lying down, staring at the uneven ceiling of the cave. Hunger had transformed into something else. It was no longer desire for food. It was emptiness, a hole that did not ask to be filled, only to be acknowledged. He was dying, slowly, and he knew it. Yet something in him refused to interrupt the process. It was in this state between wakefulness and delirium that the final temptation came. And this one was different. It was not a voice, it was a vision. Jesus saw the world opening before him, cities, nations, empires. He saw crowds, armies, palaces. He saw real, tangible, immense power. And he saw himself at the center, not as a prophet, but as a king who could end injustice once and for all, who could enforce peace, who could impose goodness, and a presence older than the other voices spoke without words. It was a proposal, not a deception, but an agreement. All of this can be yours, all this power, all this capacity to change the world. You would not need to convince anyone. You would not need to suffer. You would not need to wait. Just accept that the end justifies the means. Just admit that power, used correctly, is the fastest path to redemption. Jesus remained silent for a very long time, because this temptation was not obvious. It was not asking something for himself. It was offering something for everyone. It was the promise of efficiency, of immediate results, of benevolent control. In that vision, he saw a world without hunger, without war, without oppression, and he saw that all it required was accepting that absolute power in the right hands was good. But then deep within that vision, he saw something else. He saw that in that world no one would choose, no one would grow through difficulty, no one would learn compassion because no one would need it. He saw a world saved, yet empty of real humanity. He saw that saving people from themselves was killing them in another way. Jesus spoke, and his voice was only a whisper, yet it carried absolute certainty. I did not come to conquer. I came to walk alongside. The vision dissolved. The desert returned. The silence came back, but it was different now. It was clean. Jesus closed his eyes, and for the first time in 40 days, slept deeply. Without dreams, without voices, without visions. When he awoke, it was morning. He did not know which day it was, and it did not matter. He rose with difficulty. Every muscle protested. He walked to the entrance of the cave and looked at the desert. It was the same. Nothing had changed out there. But inside him, something fundamental had solidified. He now knew what he would not do. He knew which paths he would not take. He knew that the power he carried was not meant to force, but to offer. Not to impress, but to reveal. Not to control, but to liberate. Jesus began the walk back. He did not know exactly where to, but he knew the desert had fulfilled its purpose. It had not purified him. It had not illuminated him with answers. The desert had done something more brutal and necessary. It had removed everything that was not essential. It had burned away illusions, exposed temptations, revealed the easy paths. And in doing so, it had left only the core. He walked slowly, but without stopping. With every step, the body complained. The hunger was still there, the thirst constant, the weakness real. But something stronger moved him. It was not certainty about the future. It was clarity about the present. He did not need to know every step. He only needed to take the next one. In the distance he saw smoke from camps. Human voices arrived faintly on the wind. Jesus paused for a moment. He looked back at the desert now falling behind him. He felt no relief, no victory. He felt respect. The desert had not been an enemy. It had been a teacher. When he finally reached the first group of people, they recoiled in fear. He was unrecognizable, too thin, filthy, sun-scorched, with eyes that seemed to have seen what they should not. A woman approached cautiously and offered water. Jesus drank slowly. Each sip was a shock to his system. She offered bread. He took a small piece, chewed slowly, feeling his body awaken. "Where do you come from?" she asked. Jesus looked at her, then at the desert behind, from a place where the right questions are asked. She did not understand, but she nodded. Jesus ate a little more, rested for a few hours, and then stood up. There was work to do, not the work of conquering, impressing, or controlling. The work of walking among people and offering what the desert had taught him, that real transformation does not come from outside, does not come from power, does not come from spectacular miracles. It comes from choices made in silence, from temptations refused when no one is watching, from difficult paths chosen when easy ones are available. Jesus began walking toward the cities. He did not know exactly what he would say. He had no detailed plan. But he knew something fundamental. He had descended to the bottom of himself and found not easy answers, but the courage to live the right questions. And that, he discovered in the desert, was enough to begin. The desert remained behind, empty and indifferent as always. But something had happened there. Something no crowd witnessed, no scribe recorded, no tradition ever fully captured. There, one man had faced the three fundamental temptations of human existence: immediate comfort, external validation, and absolute power. And he had said no. Not because he was too divine to fall, but because he was human enough to choose. And with that choice, made in the emptiest place on earth before no one but himself, Jesus of Nazareth ceased to be merely another prophet. He became something the world would still struggle to understand, someone who refused every shortcut to redemption and chose the longest, most painful, and most real path. The path that passes through others, not over them. He disappeared among the hills, leaving the desert behind. But the desert, in a way, would never leave him. Because 40 days without food, without comfort, without certainties, had engraved something indelible in his soul. The difference between performing miracles for himself and performing them for others. Between seeking power and seeking truth. Between forcing change and sowing transformation. The abyss had been faced. And on the other side, Jesus emerged not as a triumphant victor, but as someone who finally knew the exact weight of what he carried. And that weight, he discovered, was simultaneously lighter and heavier than he had imagined. Lighter because he no longer needed to prove anything, heavier because he would have to carry it all. And so the journey truly began.